Show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
Good evening and welcome everybody. Do we have a show for you tonight? We're going to be chatting about the recent article from the Debrief. Intelligence official says U.S. has retrieved craft of non-human origin by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. The piece discusses former intelligence official, now whistleblower, David Charles Grusch's recent revelation about the U.S. government's possession of non-human craft. Is this the revelation of the century, or just a rehashed version of the same sad story that has haunted UFO believers for decades? This time around, maybe it's at the beginning of a true disclosure, or is it just one massive old manufactured deception? We'll be talking about this and more tonight on Mysterious Library.
Well, howdy there, partner. It's another
nice.
Mysterious Library. I hope you're doing well.
Oh yeah, I'm doing good. It's great to be here chatting to you. Tuesdays are always like my crazy hectic day. I don't know if anybody else has a crazy Tuesday, but my busiest day of the week is always Tuesday. But it culminates in talking to you, Jason, and Sue, getting to interject or not interject, sometimes interject, interact with all of our wonderful, loyal listeners who join us in the chat. So please come and say hi if you're listening in the YouTube or Facebook chats. We love to hear from you all. And if you haven't liked and subscribed yet to the Untold Radio Network, you really should be. There's a bunch of shows. In fact, we're going to talk tonight, as we'll get into it in a minute, but the UFO whistleblower story, which Jason and I first touched on in another one of his off-network shows. In other words, not on Untold Radio Network, but Jay Katz and Aspasia on their wonderful Down South Anomalies hit this topic and did a great job on their show earlier this week as well.
Yes, they did.
Watch this and then go and watch theirs, because those guys really understand the history behind this as well. It's probably the most thorough podcast analysis so far I've seen or heard is theirs. It's great. I mean, we did a great job too. Don't get me wrong. What was your show we chatted on with Donnie?
Yeah, it's Jason McLean Questions Everything.
Yeah, we did that one quick off the bat as well. Like the story broke and boom, we recorded that thing. So I think I know a little bit more about it now. Like I jumped in having just read the Debrief article and that was it.
Right.
So
well, and something that we'll talk about it today. I think in a lot of ways, again, I love what they did with that podcast. I completely agree with you. I think it's probably the most in-depth exploration of this particular topic. But this topic really is, when you get past that sort of superficial, it's like, hold on, right? Someone's got some explaining to do here, and I love their analysis of it. That was great.
Well, what was great is that they put it in the historical context, which so many
Mhm.
people fail to do. I mean, you and I do it. It's what we do. Our
Right.
whole shtick is putting everything in a cultural and
Mhm.
historical context. But you don't often see other people with that depth of historical knowledge and understanding of any of these topics in the Fortean field who go, hang on, we can't talk about what happened yesterday unless we rewind and talk about what happened
Right.
80 years ago, you know? But
No, exactly. Well,
it's always
and
nice
to
to see that.
okay, I kind of figured we'd get into that a little bit later, but that's a great point, and I think it's worth addressing now. I think so much of this conversation is very much directed by, I'm really trying to find some kind words here. Sort of a collective ignorance of a lot of researchers, a lack of historical understanding,
Yeah,
and
an historical amnesia almost, like it's
yeah,
just this it's like a fishbowl in the present. Oh, you know, I forgot what
right,
happened
exactly.
last
It's like
time I went
10
around the
seconds.
world.
Oh, it's a brand new thing. But and again, this is not necessarily to go. I mean, yes, I am clearly going with the researchers on this one, but it's a broader, but again, the broader community and even the public, there's no understanding, and they try to limit that scope so narrowly. That's like, whoa, 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 whoa. What about this over here? And they're like, we don't know. We don't care about that over there, right? So whether it's history, again, the historical context, whether it's things that have gone, that are maybe just slightly adjacent to these topics, there is a profound ignorance out there, but you're not going to find it on this channel, which is the point, right? Go give them a listen. Stay here. Y'all know what we're listening to, and the people on this channel are going to help put a lot of these things into a broader context to give you a greater understanding of what's actually happening, and do a little bit more research and not just tell you what it is. Let's be honest, that somebody probably wants out there. Someone with a 3-letter acronym in front of their name is all I'm going to say.
And it's always the hard thing is to point at
Mhm.
who's behind it all. I think that's what some of the writings on this are good at. I mean, the problem is a lot of the analysis in things like the debrief are from people who I'm not going to say they're biased because that's unfair. I think there's some good journalism in the debrief,
Mhm.
but it's
Yeah.
still from a position which is closer to and it's the whole shtick of the site. I
Mhm.
get that side, I guess, is looking at it from this government, insider
Yeah.
perspective. So interviewing people and trying to get the inside story, but that has a couple of assumptions. One is that there is some massive secret which
Mhm.
the intelligence agencies all know, or some of the intelligence agencies all know about this
Right.
UFO reality, and that's a belief which I still don't think has been justified to actually hold that belief aggressively, and I'd
Yeah.
be very reluctant to start my research or my examination of the field starting in the space that the only way we're going to find out the truth about this is to get a government whistleblower or to go and talk to sources in the government because they got to know this. As Keel
Mhm.
said, Valet used to say, there's no evidence at all that the government has any deep real understanding of the more anomalous aspects of the phenomenon. I'm sure they have all
Mhm.
kinds of aspects about the technology being flown in the skies or compartments of it. And I
Yes.
don't think that is necessarily non-human or extraterrestrial or whatever we want to call it. But to think that we can solve the UFO mystery by focusing on government
Mhm.
intelligence, it just to me seems to be something that the new ufology, which Keel talked about in 72, which we've talked about before here, or in 73, when there was this
Yeah.
wave of Valet and Keel and Steiger and all these other people, we thought we'd gone
Mhm.
beyond this constant disclosures coming in any day, and we're going to know the story. And the government has little green men and alien bodies.
Yeah.
They recover crash saucer stuff, and there's this dark conspiracy which dates back to Ray Palmer, dates back to freaking 1948. These stories.
No, exactly. And there was something you mentioned, and I just went and double checked because Ralph Blumenthal is one of the authors of this article, and I remember, like, I know that name, and I was trying to remember, uh, because I know he's with the New York Times, right? Dude's been around forever, but I'm trying to remember, because he works for some other places as well. Um, I was trying to remember what I know he's got a lot of alien books. It just disappeared on me. I was trying to remember because there was something else that he did when he worked for the New York Times. There was a part, something in his history that it keeps clicking in the back of my mind. I'll see if I can find it later. But to your point, Ralph Blumenthal is not just some ace reporter. He's not Lois Lane out there, hoofing it for the story. He's very much an establishment, reporter. I use that word in quotation marks very deliberately. He's very much, to your point, this entire. I do want to get to the actual substance of the article here in a second, but to your point, so much of this community seems to be like, again, well, we want official governmental documentation, an official governmental response. Why? At what point would their official governmental response be any more trustworthy than the denial that they've been giving for the last 70 years? Like, this is the part that frustrates me. Well, if they admit that they were lying, yes, but that doesn't mean what they were lying about or what the lie even was.
Yeah, both Blumenthal and Kean, and no offense to them, they're potentially wonderful researchers. They certainly write well, but they're both, people that are inside the power loop.
Yeah.
Clearly, I mean, Leslie Kean's grandfather was like a New York senator or something, right? Like
Yeah.
these aren't people who you're right are just the Lois Lane or some or the Clark Kent if he wasn't Superman growing up in Kansas and making their way to the big smoke. These
Yeah.
are people who are positioned with inside
Yeah.
this type of, I suppose, thinking, which for starters is going to assume that the government knows everything. It's going to
Yeah.
assume if there's secrets, it's going to be hidden there and they're going to know. It's not going to take
It
an
is good.
esoteric approach.
That's the other part here. And is good. The government not only knows everything but that its knowledge is correct and that it's good, that the actions the government are taking are for our benefit, that it's the West Wing assumption, right? Sure, maybe people have different policy ideas or different thoughts on how something should be, but everyone deep down just really wants the best for everyone. And they
Right.
really care about you. And they're really trying really hard.
And there's a real reluctance to look at conspiracy beyond the idea that it's a safe conspiracy now because it's been all over the place to say that the US government are hiding facts about UAPs. That's been stock standard. You can say that without any kind of people looking at you like you're a loon since 2017, since the Blumenthal and Kean article about the secret, UAP
Yeah.
programs was on the New York Times front page, right? So now you can say that. That's not even conspiracy theory anymore, but both Kean and Blumenthal have both said, oh, this isn't a conspiracy to release false information, or this isn't a controlled leak of information. This is the real McCoy. How anybody could assume that this just has to be real because you've had a few different sources tell you similar things or whatever the rationale
Yeah.
is, for this. It's like, that doesn't mean those few different sources aren't conceivably many things. A, operating under some kind of, control themselves. B, being given information that they've said you can run with. The fact that the current whistleblower Grusch had to put all his stuff through the Department of Defense's OK division, which says, yes, you can talk about this. That alone kind of, even forget the fact that he was involved in drafting the new whistleblower language for UAPs, which we talked about on your show. Again, what was your show, Jason?
Jason McLean Questions Everything. And just for context, you're talking about Mr. Grusch. The gentleman who is the whistleblower. He also wrote the material for, as you're pointing out, the whistleblower protections.
Yeah, he was the person who wrote with the senators. It was Marco Rubio, and who's the other one? I always forget the other senator.
Yeah, I mean, again, you're asking me for names.
Anyway, my point is,
you knew me better than that, Dean.
Of course, it's Kirsten Gillibrand. I had to check that. I didn't want to get it wrong.
Yeah.
He helped with the language to provide UAP whistleblowers the benefit to go ahead and do what he did, and then he turns out to be the main whistleblower. So there's all these levels of super just strangeness involved. So to assume that none of this was coordinated. It clearly was coordinated. If no more was coordinated, then some people wanted to get the truth out about UFOs, so they started having intelligence officials working with senators and working with, to get the official story, the true story out. But to kind of come forward and go, I don't think there's any conspiracy to leak this information. There was clearly a mechanism designed to release this information. Whether you want to believe the information's true or whether the information's not true. And because I suspect, and again, people should go and watch the show that you and I did, because we could rehash a lot of this, but basically the legal firm that represented Mr. Grusch, and they've since wound back, they've kind of since stepped back and said, well, we're not saying anything he said is true. We were just kind of helping him to defend himself because it seemed like he was being, perhaps persecuted unfairly for being a whistleblower. But that firm, one of the head, the original founder of the firm used to be the inspector general, who is now the person that you go through to do this kind of whistleblowing. And now he's running a private law firm. And the other guy has similar, very strong links with intelligence and with senators. One of them, as we were talking about, I think was it McCulloch, or was it, I shouldn't say that, I don't want to get it wrong, but one of them had interned for like three of the most powerful Democratic senators in the world, had spent all this time, they'd both spent all this time in intelligence agencies. These are, the firm representing him were people who were inside the Washington Beltway as well. On your show, I think I said something like swamp, which is a little unfair. It's just what comes to mind because it's what's talked about. But it's clearly what some people would call the swamp, or some people would call the deep state. This ongoing connection of intelligence agencies and high-placed senators who were in power for decades, and the idea that there's this interconnection inside the Beltway, and people know people, and things get done, and it works kind of contra to the traditional Republican, meaning the American system of government, not the Republican Party.
Well, this is what we call the good old boy network, right down here in the South, right? It's the good old boy network. It's not about whether you're right or wrong. It's none of that. It's who do you know? And essentially what you have is a very clear, and this is what's been discussed for a long time, this, whether you call it the swamp, the deep state, it is the class of people. I would call it the new aristocracy. It is the class of people for whom they have actual power, not perceived power, but actual power, and that their money is essentially extracted from the government, and they all know each other, and which means they are all essentially friends, but they're going to the same people, right? And there's a trick that the CIA has used for a long time, and it's now legal to do here since 2014, I believe, because they signed the law allowing them to use counterintelligence and disinformation propaganda here in the U.S. But essentially, what happens is you're a CIA agent. You go and you plant a story in two different newspapers, right? You go to your contacts there, the people that will write what you want them to write. You give them a story. They cite anonymous sources. You then go back to, say, a judge. You say, I need this FISA warrant or whatever. And you say, I have this allegation. And then they say, well, what other, claims you have? He says, but look, I have in this newspaper, I have two different newspapers here citing, these anonymous sources about this claim. Therefore, my claim must have validity. And they say, well, yes, your claim must have validity. Look, there's these two independent sources stating that you have, that this is a theory. You're coming to me with the same theory. We need to go. The problem is the dude who you're talking to is the dude who planted those two stories. That's what we're seeing here. Again, to your point, everyone involved seems awfully incestuous. It's the same names that keep coming up over and over and over and over again. And you could just assume, for Dean there, you could assume that you have everyone again with just, gee golly willikers, I want to tell the truth intentions. And that's everyone in the chain of everyone in the know in this. Or you could take 2 seconds and realize that's not how Washington, D.C. or the DOD or anyone or any human being actually works. And say, well, if we're seeing the same names pop up over and over and over and over again, maybe it's because, to your point, this is a directed and deliberate release of information. In fact, I'll go so far as to say some of it's probably true. In fact, there's a lot. In fact, it may be factual. There's a great line there, like said, people, particularly with the news media, is it's factual, but it's not truthful, because you can be factual and not be truthful. And in fact, I think a lot of this stuff is probably factual, but it's definitely not truthful. And and to your point, the people who are the ones releasing this information, the ones whom it's being released to, they're all part of this group, and everyone's just sort of, oh, let me take it like it's a piñata, right?
Yeah, I think there's the problem is too, the UFO community wants this to be true so badly. So in fairness, there are some people within the community who are, and you could argue, for example, that Jay Katz and Aspasia in the community, I know they've been involved in
Yeah.
high levels in UFO research, private research
Yes.
organizations in Australia, and they're suspicious of it. And I think there are people in the community who have heard enough tales spun enough times that they're suspicious of it, particularly when the language being put forward by both this article in the Debrief and also, of course, the interview with Grusch on News Nation, which kind of came
Yeah.
out like the day later or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which was saying, it's the Australian, it's the Australian journalist who ran the story. What's his name? I should know. I'm an Australian. His name is Ross Coulthard, of course, is the person who interviewed Grusch. And he's saying there's never been anything like this before. There's never been anybody of high rank. Well, there's
Right.
definitely been people of high rank. We talked about Philip Corso on your show, who was very high up in foreign technology retrievals. He was like, he was a higher rank than Grusch is. Now, people in response to that have said things like, well, but he didn't go before Congress and take whistleblower protections. He just wrote a book. But the idea that this story is particularly new,
Right.
it certainly isn't new. And it's been pushed
Not
on
at
the
all.
surface level that this is super new, again, by people who seem to have some type of amnesia. And maybe some of them don't even have amnesia. Maybe some reporters who now are like 30 or something, right?
Yeah.
Don't even remember the Corso story, certainly don't remember anything before that. And so they come out having cut their teeth back in 2017, or even maybe some reporters who weren't paying attention to UFOs who've been around for 50 years, right? But all of a sudden, post 2017, they haven't heard anything like this before. It's like there's an official coming out saying that they really do have sources and alien bodies. And incidentally, the debrief piece doesn't talk about the alien body revelation at all. And I've seen Kean interviewed, and she downplays it as well and says, well, I haven't heard anything about alien bodies. He didn't say anything about that. But of course, when Grusch does the interview on News Nation, he says, yes, they got the non-human pilots as well, or words to that account. And obviously, in many ways, that's a more staggering story than the technology.
Right.
If there were alien, what does that even mean? Let's use alien meaning non-human, because it could mean anything. And in fairness to Kean, I'll give her this. I did see an interview with her the other day, because I've actually paid a little more attention since we jumped into it when we did your show. But I saw an interview with her the other day when she was saying that doesn't mean extraterrestrial. This might be far more complicated or sophisticated. We don't know what it comes from. And I'm like, that's interesting on a number of levels. If you're the front journalist person for this story, which seems to be what my instinct tells me, if you're the person who runs the New York Times, who writes the New York Times story with Blumenthal and then does this story in the Debrief, if you're doing interviews now starting to say, well, that doesn't mean ET, are we going to get a new push that these things aren't ET? Is that going to be I know that's so speculative what I just said. I have no idea, but it's interesting that of the probably couple of journalists who are literally at the front of this, one of them is now starting to say, well, even if they're ET, even if they're non-human, that doesn't mean they're extraterrestrial. It could be far more complicated than that.
I just had a thought on Ralph Blumenthal, but real quick, because that is an excellent point that I think is actually one of the things I want to talk about, because there's literally one line or like one paragraph of the actual text of the brief I really want to talk about. But that is interesting, right? The fact that that's in there. Back to your point about, well, is it just the fact that the reporters aren't known because maybe they weren't in the UFO field, because it wasn't even respectable to talk about this before 2017? it could just be that they are, again, some of these people are young, like literally it was like today or yesterday, Time did a put out a Twitter commentary on the dam that was destroyed, or again, we don't even know if it was bombed over in Ukraine. They said, could this be Ukraine's Chernobyl? Like, seriously? Are you this stupid? Where do you think Chernobyl was? Right? And to your point, it could just be that a lot of these reporters are either too young, too stupid, both, or just totally ignorant. And it's like, isn't ignorance and stupid the same thing? No, they really aren't.
Or they weren't, or they literally, the
Yeah.
UFO story wasn't anything except a fringe story.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They're just ignorant of the subject.
2017. They're
Right.
ignorant, but not maybe the way that we go, oh, you're an ignoramus. It's just like, if it was
No, they're just
something which
ignorant
was,
of the subject.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
ignorant in the
They
in
could
the
also be
non kind of
ignorant and
derogatory
stupid.
term. Yeah.
That's the thing. It could be a wonderful mixture of all of the above. It's incompetence, it's disinformation, it's sensationalism, it's all kinds of things that could be going on. But my broader point here is going back to we have Corso, we've got Paul Hellyer, we've got Nick Pope. We've had much higher ranking people have this conversation, which goes back to your point. Why is this gentleman's claim is being taken with such fervence, and why is it being grabbed so hard and endorsed so loudly by people who have this vested interest in what is clearly a system of governance? They aren't even reporters. It's a system of governance. Can you address Horace Smith's question
Sure.
here?
Well, you have,
Because I think it's a great question.
yeah, Horace, the Department of Defense has an official spokesman has come out and says there's nothing that they're aware of to verify the whistleblower claims. I also think the UAP, what's it called now? It always changes its name, but one of the
Yeah.
UAP task forcey things came out also and said that they didn't have anything reflecting what he talked about. But then again, in fairness to Grusch, according to him, there's these levels within other so his version is interesting, and it almost sounds feasible, to be honest. This is what is the most feasible part of what Grusch is saying, is that
Yeah.
the UAP secret program has never been one secret program. It's been compartmentalized in various programs. So people have been read in. Say there's, I don't know, a satellite program looking at the planet, searching for military installations from space. One person or a couple of people in that program will be read in to look for something anomalous, which is like flying saucer crashes. And somebody over here in another department will be, read in, but just to, forward, any other report which is somehow anomalous. So what he suggests is that it's not one organization, it's within these secret programs, or even more secret programs, or secret parts of the program which are embedded. So it's throughout multiple programs. So if Grusch is right, then conceivably people could come out and in all good conscience say, we don't know, because that person probably wouldn't know. I'm just playing devil's advocate, but that's conceivably the reality of the situation if Grusch is telling the truth. And incidentally, we were talking about this a little bit before the show, Jason and I. We're not saying that Grusch is somehow lying. He could be being, because he's not saying he's seen the sources or he's seen the dead bodies, which incidentally is what Corso did say. Corso handled the materials. Philip Corso, who was, again, his book the day after Roswell was a very popular book in the late 90s, a bestseller in the UFO community, because here's somebody who was in the US Army, very high up in the retrieval of foreign technology or whatever his department was. And he said, yeah, we got sources and dead bodies, and we fed the technology, which became things like fiber optics, and I can't even remember, maybe silicon chips or Kevlar or whatever. We gradually fed those discoveries into American industry to make the country strong. So it was very much this, kind of patriot saying we did our duty and we turned Roswell into commercial success for the US. But in fairness, Grusch might be a genuine patriot. I've noticed they've started, as they always do, to roll out the Navy pilots again as well. They always roll out the Navy pilots because America's going to believe a pilot. I mean, I want to believe them. I'm sure the pilot who's saying, well, this stuff isn't ours, and, maybe what Grusch is saying, we really should look into it because it would explain things, or whatever the narratives are. Those men are probably genuine patriots, and they probably have been rolled out in a capacity where they wouldn't even know what was going on back here. They might have seen these craft, but they're not going to know what's being tested out of Skunk Works or out of Dreamland. So we're starting to see a lot of the same. And I suppose you're going to, in any news story, see the same experts and the same faces come up, but you also wonder then how much of this is engineered. And when the two front reporters, Blumenthal and Kean, both say this isn't engineered at all, and they're at the tip of the spear, it makes you think, well, if it was engineered, you're the last people who are going to be telling me it's engineered, because you're the mouthpieces of this story. And I've got no way of proving that, but obviously that's not the person that you should necessarily believe if they say this isn't engineered or rolled out at all, because if it is engineered and rolled out, it's literally going through them. So
so what I was trying to see is if I could show and it's weird that you'd imagine somebody else would have asked this, but there's a senator, former member of the military, Richard Blumenthal, who is a senator. I think he's related to Ralph Blumenthal. That's the thing, is I think they're related. I just can't remember how they were. I was trying to find that. But again, this just goes back to there's that. It's not just that he's a part of the swamp. He's really a part of the swamp. This very incestuous thing. To your point, it goes, but then why would we believe what you're saying? Right. We've asked this with Richard Doty, right? When we did Mirageman, when he comes in and says, yeah, I lied about all this. I manipulated the entire, this group, UFO researchers for decades. But I'm really being honest when I say that there's real UFOs, and this is why I'm in the community. I want to have this. It's like, whoa. Why? You've just admitted to lying for decades. Why should we believe, right, that you're being honest now? That this isn't just a continuance of what you were doing, right? And that's sort of this whole thing. To your point, it's like, why would we trust what you're saying? I see.
And this is going to sound like this is the type of questions that they're being asked by some people like Jay Katz and Aspasia, and there's a few other people in our space who have, but by the broader, I don't know if it's being asked widely enough. Yeah, I think there's picking up some momentum of this conversation since we had it last week. But if somebody comes forward who says all of these things, and there was all of this time when they were setting up all the methodology and the protocols and the legislation so they could come forward. If you were running this top secret, biggest secret in the history of the in the history of the world, right? Wouldn't you go, it looks like this guy's about to blow the whistle on us?
Right.
And really, is the security that bad that wouldn't have been stopped? And because again, Kean said, this program spends more money on the secrecy than it spends on the program, I've been told. Well, if they spend more money on the security and the secrecy, they would have seen this whistleblower coming from a mile away. And I mean, I don't want to say what would happen, but my suspicion is if this is the biggest secret than the A-bomb, then it would have been.
Well, and I mean, literally we did, again, back on the other show, Jason McLean Questions Everything. We talked about why hasn't, I just forgot his name. Bob Lazar. Why hasn't Bob Lazar been Epstein? It would have been really easy to do that in late 80s, early 90s, even mid 90s. You could have easily pulled it off. It's like, there's a point where you have to say, if they're saying something that is this vital, this big, this deep, this important, and they were saying something that people with this kind of connection don't want said, why are they still around? When we know for a fact that there are people with far less interesting stories who have ended up shot in the back of the head twice, and that's how they committed suicide in the middle of the field, and there's no, and they were in their socks and there's no grass stains on them. Like, we've seen this happen plenty of times. Everyone's like, yep, no, he clearly just shot himself with a shotgun while his hands were tied behind his back. It's a terrible way to go. you have to ask again. Let's give this gentleman the benefit of the doubt and say he believes everything that he's saying.
Yeah, I
Does
mean,
that
look,
mean that it's like, but he's saying something that this much larger, much broader, this deep organization, they must be saying what they once said, or
and
they
look at
wouldn't be able to say it.
yeah, and look at little journalists like Danny Casolaro or Jim Keith, both of who were Casolaro, certainly Keith probably, were, you know, took a way. Let me say it in a way that I can say it on the network. They were probably removed,
Yeah,
permanently, lethally, because of the stories
Mhm.
that they were reporting.
Right.
And those stories, some of them are kind of insidious and whacked and weird, but if those little reporters get whacked when they're going to release a story like that, what is going to happen when these people get, whiff of a really big story
Yeah.
about to be dropped? And incidentally, I'm trying to remember the lawyer's name. Watch the movie Accidental Truth if nobody's seen it. I'm not sure if it's out yet. We
I don't
played it
think
at
it's out yet. Yeah,
Midwest Weird
we
Fest. It's
reviewed
from
it, but it's not even out yet.
from MUFON and from Ron James. They interview a lawyer who I think represented, the New York
Mhm.
Times and various other agencies. So he was a real insider as well. And he's saying, if there's a story the government don't want the New York Times to run, the New York Times editorial department feel it's their duty, and they have for decades not to run that story. Like, so if a UFO story drops on the front page of the New York Times, that's a story which has been allowed to drop on the front pages of the New York
Yeah.
Times.
They're not pushing. Yeah, this is not they were not being rebellious with that.
Not at all.
Real quick, because I do
Not
want to get
at all.
to this one section of the text, but Kim Enrock asks, this is how can something be factual but not truthful? I've been trying to think about a good way to ask, or to a good example without getting overly political, but let me say it this way. Let's say a reporter comes out and says the U.S. military attacked a poor village in the Sudan. Okay, I was just factual. I told you what happened. Now, I can couch that story in even more sympathetic language, and give you no broader context. I have still been factual about my statement. However, if I omit the fact that these were people who were terrorists that were holding hostages because they'd kidnapped 200 children and we were doing this raid to recover these children, that changes the context of the entire story, right? You can be factual without being truthful. Also, let's say Bob has accused Dean of jumping up and down, screaming obscenities at raccoons, right?
It was Bob outside last weekend when those
He
raccoons
probably
were
was.
sniffing around my chicken coop.
Well, Bob doesn't know where, always goes where he's not wanted. Like, Bob, don't you have a life? Get out of Dean's backyard. But let's say Bob comes up and says Dean was jumping up and down naked in his backyard. I'm going to make it naked now. And screaming at these poor defenseless raccoons. I can come out and say, as a reporter, well, it has been alleged that Dr. Dean Bertram will nakedly jump up and down and scream profanities at these poor defenseless raccoons. Now, do I know that story happened? No, I do not know that it happened. Do I have any evidence that it happened? No, I have one person telling me that it happened. Now, if I omit the fact that, if I tell you that it's Bob, and that Bob is a drug dealer who has a grudge against Dean because Dean got him turned into the cops, that would change the entire context of the story, whether it should be believed, whether it should be taken seriously, that it may or may not have malicious intent. All of that changes. But what I did by omitting that context doesn't make my statement less factual, but it absolutely makes it less truthful. Our entire news apparatus works that way. They will tell you facts, but they will not tell you the truth. They will not put it into that broader context, because that context will tell you, I shouldn't believe any of this. These people are not truthful. These people have their own agendas. They've lied to us for decades. Why would I trust what they're saying now? They omit that, which again goes back to, why are they hyping this guy when you've got Paul Hellyer, Corso, and I just forgot his name. He was with the British, Nick Pope. It's like, you've got these people who've been out for decades talking about this. Why now? Why is this one guy, the guy that everyone's like, ah! But here's the one text I want to actually talk about, because it stood out, and I think it connects to what we were talking about last week.
Just before you read that, I will say one thing to add to that, because I think this could be taken politically, but I don't mean it to be taken politically.
Yeah,
we know that there is serious interrelations between the intelligence agencies in this country and the mainstream media, for better or for worse. That's not a judgmental thing. That's just the reality. When the Russiagate scandal first broke, we know that Comey briefed Trump about the Steele dossier, which had these fake allegations in it, which we know was fake now. We know the Steele dossier was paid for by political opposition to Donald Trump. That's not even debatable anymore. Comey knew it apparently too. He briefed Donald Trump on the contents of the Steele dossier, having already told CNN supposedly that he was about to brief Donald Trump. So then as soon as he'd done it, he could tell CNN that he briefed Donald Trump, and CNN could immediately run the story that the president knows there's a dossier about him saying about this Russian collusion. That's actually literally historical fact now. So to not think that there are plans between news agencies and intelligence agencies to coordinate the release of information and stories. And that's just one recent report. That doesn't even go into the long history.
Oh, yeah.
Of,
the church
like during the times of war would be a great example.
Yes.
The Fujo balloons, or whatever the devil they were called, that Japan was releasing over the US throughout World War II. The entire media here, that was totally the right thing. You can argue what the right thing was about Trump or not, depending on your political persuasion. But the balloons, literally the entire US press would never report one of these balloons landing or starting a fire, because they knew the Japanese wanted to hear where these balloons had landed. So the Japanese high command thought none of the balloons were landing in America, and they were killing people and burning things down.
Right, exactly.
Of course, the press was like, we'll do the right thing. And to think that the press only does that during wartime, the mainstream media only does that through wartime. No. This report after report of, again, military and intelligence working hand in hand with the media. So to think that might not be the case with UAP announcements is, again, oblivious to historical reality. Anyway, I'm sorry, but I had to add that to the point.
No,
you made a great point, but that just really contextualizes it within some other historical stories.
That's a great point, because we've seen this over and over and over again. And it's just, again, it's a big piece of this puzzle. I want to talk, so there's a line in here from Christopher Mellon, who, again, part of the he's a part of this. He's part of the intelligence community. He was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. He worked with Congress on the whole UAP thing. This is his quote: "A number of well-placed current and former officials have shared detailed information with me regarding this alleged program, including insights into the history, governing documents, and the location where a craft was allegedly abandoned and recovered." I want to read that last part again. Where a craft was allegedly abandoned and recovered. This is one of those questions that, people are like, oh, cool. Again, they're focusing on the recovered part. This was abandoned. You're telling me, right? This goes back to this whole thing. These aliens have traveled countless light years to get here, and they're leaving some super whiz bang craft on the side of the road like it's a Chevy Nova that you didn't get that you missed your last oil change on.
They're dropping out of the skies like mallards during duck season, according to what Grusch is saying and everybody else. And the Navy pilot I saw interviewed, who they rolled out in the past as well. Oh yeah, these things are, if there's so many of them, we can only assume they're crashing everywhere, and there's a retrieval program. how can we make that assumption? It's just so ludicrous. There's incredibly
Mhm.
advanced technologies, and the whole story is now it's not just
Mhm.
us who has these. There's a Cold War secret arms race around the whole planet, and every major government is
Mhm.
racing to collect these things. So to add to what you said, I completely agree, and it feeds into one of my favorite lines from the article, and that's towards the end of the piece in the debrief. And Grusch says, "It is dangerous for this 80-year arms race to continue in secrecy because it further inhibits the world populace to be prepared for an unexpected, non-human intelligence contact scenario." And then he adds, "I hope this revelation serves as an ontological shock sociologically and provides a generally uniting issue
Mhm.
for nations of the world to reassess their priorities." I heard that speech from Ronald Reagan about 8 times back in the
Yep.
1980s. I
Mhm.
saw that at the end of the original Watchmen comic, and I saw that in an Outer Limits episode.
Yeah.
Is there an ideology that I read that in Report from Iron Mountain, the potentially maybe real, maybe not conspiracy document?
Mhm.
Is there an ongoing narrative to get people to accept that we're being visited by ET, so we put aside our national silliness and we sing Kumbaya around the great UN campfire? 'Cause I keep hearing this story. I've been hearing this story since I mean, I wasn't around in the '50s, but this
Yeah.
story's been running since the '50s.
Oh, no, exactly. And this is it just goes back to what I mean, we talk about this ad nauseum, I know, but it's important when you're being lied to, when it and it's bad lying at this point. You've got to ask, why are you lying, right? Everyone lies. I am not an optimist. I'll say, actually, I'm very optimistic in a lot of ways, but I'll say I am cynical and very much. And it's everyone lies. The question is why and what about, right? Why are they lying to us? Y- In fact, this is one point of argument that Dean and I have over over this subject, right? Is when did the government's lies about UFOs become malicious? Because his position would be that, this prior to the late 70s, early 80s, it was just they were spinning stories about UFOs because it was just about technological development. And they just figured, okay, we can spin it with this.
And we were in a
It
Cold
wasn't
War with the Russians, in fairness, too,
right.
so
Yeah, exactly. And it was a good cover for, spy planes and all kinds of stuff like that without, so people wouldn't blow us up. Okay, that's fair. And then his point is they got malicious in the 70s and 80s to do more, to do more things. I tend to think it was malicious further back. I think this has always been a malicious uh, plan because of just how it's been relayed and how active it appears the government has been in pushing the story. They're like, now you could say, but Jason, aren't they always saying it's swamp gas from Venus? And this was just yeah, on paper, that is what is being said. However, we have to realize when a lot of this stuff was happening, the early stages of MK Ultra and even the late stages of MK Ultra were in full bore, pedal to the metal kind of progress. Understanding psyops, disinformation, how people think about things, how to manipulate. That is what we were doing. We were spending hundreds of millions of dollars even back then on that stuff. Do you think that they wouldn't look at this and say, well, how do we best convince everyone that these UFOs are real? And again, this is before they could officially lie to us without officially lying, meaning without saying, hey, it was actually without them coming out and saying it was aliens. How do we get people to believe it? Well, you create the dumbest possible story as your cover story, which is it was swamp gas reflected off the light of Venus. But it happened at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. It was light from Venus. It was bouncing off a swamp. You create the most insane cover stories. Everyone's like, of course we know you're lying about this. Like, why would you expect that to work? Because they want you to doubt. They could just come out and say, yeah, we're testing some new technology. We can't talk about it. They could have done that, but they didn't. That's the key.
You know, Mike Heiser makes a similar point with other examples. He talks about,
Mhm.
and I remember when it happened because by then I was studying UFOs academically, when the US Air Force came out in the, I don't know, mid-ish to late 90s and said, we have a solution for the Roswell bodies, dead alien bodies stories. It was Roswell crash dummies. And then somebody said at a press conference, a journalist who was cognizant of it,
Yeah.
who was talking to the DoD spokesman or the Air Force spokesman, whoever the devil it was, said, but that program happened in the 1950s. Even your
Yeah.
report even says that. So how is it that people in 1947 in
Mhm.
Roswell are saying they saw dead alien bodies if you didn't start dropping these things in New
Into the
Mexico
50s.
till the mid 50s? And he said, "Oh, we've worked it out. It's time compression." And Heiser said at that moment he knew that the whole purpose of this wasn't to try to
Mhm.
explain what actually happened. It was to throw out such a ludicrous explanation that
Yes.
everybody was going to doubt the dismissive explanation and be more likely to accept the
Mhm.
Roswell alien crash story. And that certainly seems, you know, mind you, they joke about military incompetence, but it seems kind of crazy to put forward an idea that somehow these people in the 40s, they're wrong. They actually were remembering crash bodies,
Yeah.
which was 6'4", which was 6 foot tall or something that they saw
Mhm.
in the
Yeah.
1950s, and then they remembered them as little 4 foot tall aliens from 1947.
Yeah.
No, a decade's a long you know, it's a massive difference in time. You know what you were doing, you know,
Right.
you know where you were in if you
Mhm.
were around then, where you were in 1947 and where you were in 1955, and they're probably very different places. You know,
Well,
it's not like
and
there's a month difference. You could go, well, maybe
yeah,
somebody would have got June
maybe.
confused with July, but
Yeah, but
not
it's not even
10
that. And see,
years.
it's worse because even if you're like, maybe I can't remember, was it the 40s or the 50s this happened? Okay. Yeah, some of these things were happening like 5, 8 years apart. Things kind of I get that. Here's the problem though. People remember events better than time. They wouldn't have confused the events in their head.
But
That's the problem.
what's time compression anyway? It's so ludicrous. This isn't some
Mhm.
scientific psychological term that I'm aware of. We worked it out. It's time compression. You know,
Right, exactly. Well, but okay,
some
so
Air Force officer or something.
it's funny.
Crazy.
I'm going through my rewatch of Babylon 5. We need to do a review of that.
You've
Like
said so, yeah.
for this, we need to. But I was doing my watch through of Babylon 5, and it's not a big thing, so no spoilers for a 30-year-old show now at this point. I'm getting old. Anyway, there's this, he's trying to get these alien races to sign on board with, sort of like this treaty thing with him. And so his grand plan is to make it look like something's going on, but he keeps saying nothing's happening. And he asks these other ambassadors to they have these ships out patrolling. Goes, here's the thing: when people come and ask you about this, deny it. Just deny it. He's like, but wait a minute. You want our ships on the border, right? He goes, yes. You want them patrolling, right? Yes. You want everyone to join the same treaty, right? Yes. But you don't want me to say anything about it? He goes, no, in fact, I want you to deny it. He's like, this makes no sense to me. He's like, just do it. In fact, it culminates with this scene where he asks one of the commanders who's doing this sort of voice of resistance thing, makes a quick line, says, just as a reminder, absolutely nothing happened. People have asked us questions. Absolutely nothing happened in this area at this time. So there's no reason to panic. Absolutely nothing happened there. And by the end of it, these other ambassadors are like, there must be an invisible alien enemy out there that is a threat to all of us. We have to make him protect us because he's got this advanced technology. That is literally what they're doing with a lot of this stuff. It's, I'm going to deny that there's aliens and give you the dumbest possible cover stories so that you will believe that it must be aliens.
And you know
That's
what?
what
And
this is.
exactly. And then flash forward from 1997 to 2023. So you've already got, or to 2017, let's start it there. You've already got the population doubting all the ridiculous, even going back to swamp gas explanations from Blue Book back in the 60s.
Mhm.
And you accelerate with all these. And I'll contextualize. I don't think an extraterrestrial craft crashed in Roswell. But that said, that's more believable than some of the crazy government explanations, right? So you have a population who are rightfully suspicious of what they're being told through traditional channels, who wouldn't be, rightfully suspicious of any official narrative at all, and then all of a sudden you spin it so we were right all along. They were hiding all these secrets, and you've primed them for how long? Not to mention science fiction movies, not to mention every UFO book ever written, not to mention all this type of intelligence finagling, which we've seen particularly, and you're right, you can trace it right back to the beginning, but let's even go from, the Benowitz days onwards.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much interference, so much crafting the narrative, so much playing with it, that now you start to drop this type of story by respectable insider journalists and respectable, in respectable news outlets, and you push it like it's now no longer a verboten crazy story that you can talk about. And all of a sudden you've got people who think, oh, finally they're telling us the truth.
Yeah.
But what makes you think that they're telling you the truth now? And
Right.
makes you think they were lying to you 20 years ago.
Because this is the key to disinformation and psyops, right? It really is it is the lie that you want to believe anyway. Right? That's the thing. This is what it's like. Well, why would we believe them now? Well, because they're saying the thing I want them to say. That's the worst part of the whole thing. It is, I'm denying, they create this idea, right? And they deny it and they deny it. And so now you believe it even harder. And now they're like, well, you know what? Darn it. You were right. You got me. Right.
And you know who you have run to you the hardest then? You have the people that have always thought you've been hiding the secret. So now it's the self-fulfilling prophecy. They always expected a day of disclosure.
Yeah.
You don't get the new ufology. You don't get the people who were, brought up in the line of thinking of Kean or the old Valet pre-Trinity. We won't even talk about that book now.
We're going to eventually.
We're going to have to. I feel so bad because, gosh, do I love Jacques Vallée's writings, except for Trinity, the best kept secret. But if you're in that camp, you're automatically suspicious. You're automatically like, well, I never thought they really knew what it was anyway. Or if you're in a camp which is just flat out suspicious, period, which is the only healthy camp to be in, whatever your political persuasion or UFO beliefs.
Yeah,
you're going to go, no. But if you've been suckered into that main X-Files UFO belief that I always use as the terminology, if your belief system is the government know everything, they've got the sources, everything you've been taught by mainstream popular culture for the last 30 plus years, arguably going back to Ray Palmer, arguably back to the first issue of Fate magazine in 1948. If you believe all of this stuff, then now you're like, finally, it's like this great release of all this pent up tension. And, you've felt like you've
no, you're right.
Against this behemoth that's lying to you. Oh, it's over now. Now they're starting to tell me. Fantastic.
No, you're 100% correct. And that's the entire point. Again, the story from Babylon 5 is that he wants them to sign this treaty. And so what he does is he creates a story that essentially he ends up, by denial and some other trickery, makes them believe that there's something out there, so that they think that they force him to sign that. They end up signing the treaty, but they think they're forcing him to do it. And this is what he wants to begin with. That's what this is. They create an ideology. Again, I think they've really been creating the ideology from the beginning. That's one of our points of conflict. And this is the closing of the trap. They create the ideology, they deny the ideology, so that the people who would be more willing to think something else is going on. It's like it's the attractive assistant, right? You're so busy trying, because you know that there's a trick coming in the magic trick. You're so busy watching for the trick from her that you miss what he's doing. And that's what it is. This sort of, like you said, the X-Files view is the attractive assistant. And so now, like, it's the assistant. Well, you were primed to believe it anyway, right? Speaking of the X-Files, remember the first season? I think it was season 1. There was that the Air Force pilot who he's talking about how the government will make people believe that they've been abducted by aliens. He goes, I have seen people walk into rooms full of doctors and psychiatrists and drugs and come out 10 minutes, an hour or 2 hours later, believing that they have been abducted by aliens. He goes, and there's the scene where before the Air Force comes and takes him, he's talking to Mulder and he goes, don't you understand? I don't know if I'm here, if I'm having this conversation with you. I don't know if I'm eating this pie.
That's
I
Jose
don't know
Chung.
that.
That's
What?
Jose Chung's from Outer Space, that episode.
Yeah,
It's a great
exactly.
episode.
He's like, I don't know that any of this is real. But very quickly, and there was also the other one where these people get abducted by aliens, and there is an alien in there, and he's smoking a cigarette, and it turns out he was an Air Force pilot dressed up like an alien.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great episode, but the whole point is that narrative disappears very, very early in that series.
Well, it was almost a joke episode. I think it was I shouldn't say a joke. It almost stood as a standalone, which kind of ignored the
rest of
meta
the
narrative of it. What I'd like to add, because I know we're getting close to winding up now, and it's a drum you and I have both beaten, but it's so important to beat it right now, because we're talking about X-Files UFO belief, which is the way I always describe it, because it's a modern way of looking at UFOs, relatively, that sources were retrieved. We back engineered them. We had, deals with aliens. There was maybe competing factions, whatever, there were secret bases, and the government knows all of this. That's the story of the X-Files, right?
Yeah.
And I think people know what I mean when I say it. But X-Files version of UFO belief, where that all starts to come together, is what we've mentioned briefly here. And that's when Richard Doty who's an AFOSI agent, is the front man for an intelligence operation against Paul Benowitz, who was in the late 1970s, was an engineer whose offices and home was opposite Kirtland Air Force Base. He started picking up things from the base which he thought had to do with ETs. He reported it to the base, saying there's something weird going on, I think the ETs are, and it was actually a secret program they had. So instead of just swearing him to secrecy, which they probably should have done because he was a good patriot and he would have, they decided to spin this story that he might be onto something. It got incredibly elaborate. They fed him a computer which supposedly decoded the ET messages, which was just, the data they sent him. They flew him over like Dulce Mesa and pointed out where there were meant to be UFO crashes. It all got more and more elaborate. Who else was involved with that was William Moore. William Moore came out in the symposium at MUFON, the country's biggest UFO symposium, maybe the world's, in 1989, saying, yes, I was an asset for the AFOSI. We lied to you. We spied on you and took information back to them. I'm sorry, but that's what's happened. To contextualize it further, William Moore is also the guy who wrote the first Roswell book. He popularized Roswell. Later on, he popularized, along with Richard Doty, the underground base story, all of these kind of weird, wacky ideas. Going forward to the MJ-12 documents, which William Moore's associate, Jamie Shandera, just received in his mailbox. Richard Doty had shown something incredibly similar to Linda Moulton Howe at an Air Force base earlier, talking about U.S. government knowledge of this ancient alien, inbreeding with us or genetic interference with us, and we've got the source of crashes and all this other stuff. So this small group of people, I can't say Stanton Friedman was an asset, but I know people who will say Stanton Friedman is an asset and will lay out some convincing stories. He was certainly part of this. He was at least part of pushing the MJ-12 documents as real, where I think most people who were saying no, they were a hoax now, who objective no, they were a hoax. He was also friends with Shandera and with William Moore, and frequently appeared in documentaries with those guys. So there's this small parcel of people launched this initial idea. The crash sources, the underground bases, the government knows everything, the cattle mutilation, all this stuff which would become X-Files mythology. And so many people would pick up and believe, but it still wasn't officially accepted as reality. Then 2017, boom, New York Times. Yes, there are secret government programs looking at it. Boom, Tic Tac videos. Yes, we're seeing things we don't know what they are. And now we have a whistleblower come through very controlled channels and say, we have crash sources. We have dead bodies. We have all of this. So the stuff that was set in motion way back, whatever, if it's related or not, who knows? But what I'm saying is the belief system set in motion by AFOSI back in the late 1970s now is front story news on things like the New York Times and in the Debrief and on News Nation. And now all these chickens are coming home to rest. And we've had 40 years of people being primed to believe this stuff. And so all of a sudden, well, the government are telling us the truth. And the story started with government agents pushing this story. So think, people, before you jump. Look back at where these stories start from. Go and watch that old William Moore MUFON revelation. Go and watch a movie like Mirageman, or read Greg Bishop's fantastic book, Project Beta, and be cognizant that so much of the things that we think now are just the history of UFO belief and actually happened, were formulated or were at least pushed by people who were inside the intelligence operations of this country, and it was intentionally, for whatever reason, pushed out. And now we're seeing not just pushed on poor little Paul Benowitz in the UFO community. Now we're seeing a very similar story being pushed out at a nationwide level. In fact, at international level, in mainstream news, it's really being pushed.
Absolutely. No, 100%. I couldn't say it better. So on that note, since I can't possibly top what Dean just said there, we're going to go ahead and call this one a wrap. So guys, we really appreciate y'all. We love y'all. Again, like, follow, subscribe, share us out. You know, this channel is great. There's so much great material on here. Obviously, we are the best thing on this channel, except for Aspa and the others.
Well, Jane Aspa,
yeah. But guys, share us out, like, follow, subscribe, and we'll catch y'all next week behind the card catalog. Good night.